morning, church.
Good morning.
Good to see all of you. Anyway, I'll get right to the announcement. One very special one today. But anyway, how many are here for the first time this season? If you're comfortable, or for the first time ever, if you wouldn't mind, you can stand up and introduce yourself. Yes.
Oh, no, I'm the only one. Oh, good.
Oh, this is good. We might have a baseball game between the U.S. and Canada. Okay.
I'm Barbara Brooks. First time in this area of Mexico in my life. I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm over in Milwaukee on the other side of the canal. And where are you from? Oh, I'm from San Francisco area, but not San Francisco, out in the outskirts of San Francisco, in the country. What else are the questions?
Yeah, what part of the country?
California.
No, out in the country, not in San Francisco.
Oh, specifically, Danville, California.
Okay.
People go, yeah, they've heard of it, okay.
We used to live in La Honda, so Redwood City, La Honda.
Okay.
Yes, I know.
And so, thank you for letting me come, and I look forward to my 4 months, well, not my 4 months left, but the rest of my time coming and visiting.
Oh, good. Right on. Yes.
Well, it's not new for me, but I have my daughter, Wendy, from Oregon. We have a house in Boca. This is her first time in the 8 years we've had our house. So we're excited about her being here. And then our friend, kind of our adopted son, Jimmy, who's originally from Kansas, who lives in Oregon now. He was here in November with me when I came to unpack the house, but he's back. He's right back to Oregon. So, anyway, we're happy.
I'm Shirley. I'm a friend of Alan Sue. I live just down the road from them in Venice on Baker Drive. So I just got here yesterday for a couple of weeks.
I need to tell you, this morning I told my wife, I said, look out, because Shirley's here, now we can gang up on you. We will not allow you to get away with all this stuff. Okay.
My name is Linda LeGroy, and of course, my mom, who is not standing, is recovering from hip surgery, and very, very excited to be here is, of course, May Williams. But you will also notice my sidekick is missing. So before you ask me where my sister is, my sister is a deacon. She has been appointed a deacon and now has a contract at a church in St. Philip's Cedar, just south of Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. So Cindy will not be joining us this year, but I'm here for 2 weeks. Mom is here until the end of April, the 23rd or 24th. 23rd of April.
I'm Carolyn Stewart, and I'm from Mississauga, Canada.
Right on.
But I was originally from Flushing, Ontario. That's the high school I went to. Yeah, Dawn. I went to school with Dawn. Yeah, and my brother. Yeah. So,
Awesome.
yeah. Okay.
Good to have you. Thank you. Yes.
Mary and I are from Wenatchee in Washington State.
Well,
We drop in now and then.
you were talking good. Thank you. Good to have you. Yes.
I'm Frank, my wife Claudia. This is our first time this year, but we're doing it.
Okay.
We love it. We're from East Coast of Virginia.
Okay. Virginia. Good.
My name is Edna, and I am from Fletcherton. And I'm with my friend Dawn and Betsy, and I live at Lincoln Lake.
Awesome. Thanks, Edna. Yes, Ben.
My dad, Henry, Madison, Reese, Olivia, my wife Hannah, working in Fort St. John for we're the nephew of Rosemary Weathers.
Awesome.
So we're staying at the Castle Rosa for the next week.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes. Go ahead.
This is my family visiting from Abbotsford, Chilliwack, British Columbia, Canada. So my sister up there, my brother John, and my sister-in-law.
Awesome. That is
And I'll introduce our son. He's here visiting for 2 weeks from Burnham, BC, Adam.
Adam. Yes. Right on. How many are leaving this week? I know Claire went home. Sad to see. And you guys are heading home too? I think we gained today though. Yeah. Anyway, all of you that are heading home have safe travels. I know Claire left this week with his sister, and I haven't heard where they're at. Hopefully they're home by now. So. Not sure. Anyway, remember when I told you there was something huge today? Something really big? Pat is going to be 92 this week. So Pat, you need to stand up. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Pat. Happy birthday to you.
God bless you all.
I love it. I want Pat's the first one here. He comes walking down the street. He's an amazing guy. I just thank God for you, Pat. Good to have you here. Anyway, we're going to have a few other things going to happen this week. If you've got any medical supplies, including eyeglasses, and you're leaving, that you're going to be leaving behind, make sure that we have a box right over there for medical supplies, glasses, those kind of things, and they get distributed through the hospital. So please feel free to put any extra things or things you're leaving behind in the box. We collect clothing and household items all year for a distribution that we're going to have in March. If you have anything to donate, please bring it to the church or ask someone to pick it up from your residence. And the distribution is planned for March the 21st. There'll be more details later, but we need helpers. We need about 20 or more. And so Wynn, if you want to stand up, this is Wynn, and you can see her. It's a wonderful thing to be involved in. And you'll just be blessed if you come and help. I know you will. Also, there's a library with books in the bodega. Please take a look at that if you're running out of reading material. And there are dispensers also and baby gifts available from our community support team, and they're in the bodega also. And if you need any information about that, ask Lou or ask Darlene. And Darlene, you'll put your hand up, and Lou. And you can see them about any of that kind of stuff, and they'll be able to help you out. And just check out the bulletin or the website for our current Bible. The website is wonderful. Check it out. It just will keep you informed. And there's a women's breakfast coming up. And Suzanne would like a head count. It's going to be for next March the 6th. Is that Friday?
That's this Friday.
Friday, okay.
This Friday.
So we need a head count of ladies that would like to come to that. Yeah, you know, I got my 22. Okay. So thank you so much.
Time will be 9 o'clock until 10:30. And I will talk about how God spoke to me in a Muslim country, being a Christian in a Muslim country, and about Moses and Mount Nemo as he looked on the Promised Land.
That sounds good. All right.
Sorry, I was just waiting for more announcements. Okay, in your bulletin is the music insert for all of the songs that we're singing. So if you just follow them in order, we will rise and sing together at Calvary verses 1 and 2.
Calvary.
From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned, and he said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly, I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom."
You can be seated, but don't lose your inspiration to sing these beautiful songs together. The first song is The Wonderful Cross, and the second is Above All. I will not announce Above All, we'll just throw into Above All.
I
stone. He lived to die rejected and alone. Like a rose trampled on the ground, he took the fall and thought of me, and that's personal. That's all of us. Above all, I often think about that, like a rose that's trampled on the ground, and one day I just pictured that. This Jesus Christ who suffered and died on our behalf. And if you look at it like a rose that was trampled on the ground, and even though it was crucified and it was crushed, I just believe that there was a fragrant aroma that came from that trampled rose that just welled up and filled the earth with His good and with His glory. And all God's people say.
Amen.
We're going to take up our offering now.
And the words are on the back of your bulletin.
Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way. From the earth to the cross, my debt to pay. From the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way. From the earth to the cross, my debt to pay. From the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way. From the earth to the cross, my debt to pay. From the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high.
Please rise.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above the heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for these gifts. We thank you for the givers. And Lord, we would pray that this church would put these gifts to use for your glory, for your good. That people would absolutely know, without a doubt, that it has come with your love. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. As we do our community prayer today, our church prayer, I think it's important that we pray for those that are traveling, that'll be heading home for safety, and continue to pray for those that aren't feeling well. Pray for Wynn's mother, who when you said she was 96, and she's had a wonderful life, and just pray that God's peaceful hand is upon her. Also, I heard that my brother had a stroke this week, and my brother-in-law had a heart attack this week, and I'm having a difficult time just communicating with them. And I think the reason is I have never been the best communicator, and I don't even think they probably know when they see a message from Al. But anyway, if you would pray for our family, just that we have information on how everybody's doing, that I can pray for them. And let's just pray. Let's just spend a moment just in quiet prayer, just in silent prayer, because there's always things on our hearts that are difficult to kind of stand up and publicly pray about, but they're there, and God hears them, and we need to lift them up to God. So let's pray silently, and then I'll close the prayer. So let's pray. God, you are so good and so gracious, and we thank you. Heavenly Father, we look at the troubles that in and out and throughout our world, and especially with this coronavirus. Lord God, that you would supply the doctors and the scientists and those that are involved in finding a cure for this, finding a way to slow it down, to stop it completely. We just pray for them, that you would give them all the wisdom they need from on high. Lord God, we pray for those that in our families that aren't well, in our midst sometimes that aren't well. We just pray for their health. And Lord, not just their health, but we just pray that they feel your hand of peace upon them. Lord God, thank you for hearing our prayers. You are such an awesome God. Let us pray together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and power, and glory, forever and ever. Amen. Today we're going to be talking about the cross. And last week I talked about the church. And I talked about, it doesn't matter. It does matter. It matters to God. But, the condition of our churches, whether they're good or bad right now, or no matter what condition they're in, it's still the Church of Christ. It still belongs to Christ. It's His church. It's His body of believers. And it's huge. I never got to share this with you last week, but the list of Christian denominations around the world is huge. And Catholic, Protestant, Eastern, Oriental Orthodox, and any other Christians or groups that proclaim Christ and Christ crucified. It's absolutely huge. And when you look at it and we think about how it's survived over the year, and the one thing that you cannot leave out of the church, you cannot take out of the church that will be there until Christ returns, is the cross, the reason we're here. And I'm going to talk about the cross today. And when I think about the cross, and I think about over the years, since Christ, since his death and his resurrection, his ascension into heaven, when I think about that, and I think about where he tells the apostles that they will be the ones that will begin to plant these churches and teach the teachings of Jesus Christ, and they will be anointed with the Holy Spirit to do this. And it won't stop. Nothing will stop them. The gates of hell won't stop them. And it's happened. It's happened for over 2,000 years. And when you look at the cross and you think that it's still standing, it's still there, the church is still here. It hasn't been defeated. Still waiting for Christ to return. But yeah, you have to realize it hasn't been perfect. It hasn't been perfect. The church makes mistakes like anything else. But yet, I always look at it this way. It doesn't matter if people are going off to the right or people are going off to the left. They still return to the cross. They still return to the cross. And I don't know what that looks like. It must be a map that I don't even want to see, but it's God's people that still, they find their life in the cross and they return to the cross. And I believe that happened. And I believe that's the reason that it stays today. Whenever you think about names and you think about the different denominations, and if you think of Luther or any of those, I was sharing with the group on Friday that, I remember a young guy we sent off to Bible school. He came back and he said, Pastor Al, he said, are you a Calvinist or are you an Arminian? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't think I'm either. Oh no, you have to be, Pastor Al. You have to be one or the other. And I said, I don't think so. He said, well, no, my professor told me you had to be one or the other. I said, who told you? My professor. And I said, who's Calvin? Well, he was a guy back in, I don't even know the dates, but he had this theology, and he was Arminian. Well, he was another guy, and I had these dates. And I said, what's your professor's name? Well, he's Joe somebody. I said, oh yeah. I said, isn't it interesting that these theologies and everything, they're right or wrong, they're our interpretation of it, man's interpretation. But I want to believe I'm a follower of Christ. I want to believe I'm a follower of Christ crucified and Christ raised again, waiting for my Lord to return. I don't know how that's going to work out. I haven't read the last theologian's idea of when that's going to happen, but I'm going to be on the side of the cross. And that's what this verse is talking about, because Jesus began to tell them, and it's interesting, Peter, I would never want to be in Peter's shoes. Jesus just gets done telling them, I'll read this to you. He says to the disciples, he says, but who do you say I am? Because everybody's saying, well, somebody says you're John the Baptist or Elijah or Jeremiah, one of the prophets. But who do you say I am? And so Peter jumps up and answers, well, you're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. Wow, he's right on. And then Jesus says this to him. He says, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. That idea wasn't just yours. It didn't come out of a book. It didn't come out of your theology. It didn't come out of your teaching from your grandmother. That came from God. So don't take any credit for it. You see, there's a difference between our thoughts and God's thoughts. There's a difference between our ways and God's ways. God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. God is the source. I remember years ago finally understanding what this source really looked like, and I was on probably one of the longer pack trips that I'd ever taken, and it started out from the Alaska Highway, and it started along a river, and we went for 4 days, traveled for 4 days. We traveled about 20 miles a day, camp at night. But when we started out along the highway, when we started out along this river, it was just after a rain, and it was muddy, and it was swollen, and we had to cross it a couple of times, and the horses weren't really sure where they were going to put their feet, and we weren't really sure if we were going to be swimming or not, but it just wasn't easy. And it was huge. There were logs that were coming down, and I thought, what are you doing? Like, You do this for fun, Al? And, but the further we went, day 1, day 2, we got to day 3 and day 4, and the further we got up that river, it was amazing too, the mountains. I've always thought of this because the foothills in the first part, they weren't as high, they had more trees on them. I mean, you wouldn't even want to walk in that stuff. And and I often thought that's what ministry's like sometimes. When somebody's arguing about some theology or some kind of a idea, I've always said, I don't want to die on this mountain way down here. I don't want to die there. And you keep going up that river and you keep getting, and you know what happens when you keep going up? The mud starts to disappear, the logs start to disappear, the mountains get higher and steeper and more defined. And when you find, I've actually, on this trip, I remember going right to the very source of where that first drop of water came out of the rock. And it was absolutely pure. It was absolutely so crystal clear, I didn't have to worry about putting anything in my water bottle to kill the bacteria or the beaver fever or anything like that. I just remember going up there and drinking of that water that was coming out of that rock. And it was so clear. It was so distinct. It was so Christ. And often, when we look at the church and we look at the problems in the church, the river is clear at the source. And we always need to go to the source. We always need to go to the cross. To go back to the cross. Because God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son. He suffered and died on the cross. So we should not perish but have everlasting life. That's where it began. That river of life that began at the cross. The plans of God were not from the minds of man. They were God's plans. And it's interesting then as Jesus, after He tells Peter what a great statement He just made, and He tells Peter that, I'm going to found the church on you, the rock, on the apostles and the disciples, and that the gates of hell won't stop it. Well, that happened. That happened to Peter just shortly after Christ ascended into heaven. He preached his first message at Pentecost, and thousands were saved. And Peter must have looked back at that and thought, wow. But Peter must have looked back at this and thought, woe is me. If you read on, woe is me. Like, how could I be so smart and so silly? And I'm going to read on. From that time on, then, Jesus began to explain to His disciples that He must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that He must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. He began to tell them that. Notice the words here. Notice the words of Christ. Must. Jesus said that He must go to Jerusalem. He must go. He said that He must die on the cross. Suffer and die on the cross. He must be killed. And on the third day He would be raised to life. This was a must. And then Peter takes Him aside after Jesus is telling him this wonderful stuff. Peter takes Him aside and he says, never, Lord. Who do you think you are? Like, this isn't going to happen to you. Never. He's actually rebuking God Almighty. He's actually saying to Him, this isn't going to happen. In fact, He says, this shall never happen to you. I remember a friend of mine, he had a large family, had a little guy, the youngest one, I think they were all girls, but one guy, little guy named David, he was 4 years old. And he and his wife, well, that many kids, 13, 14 kids, you've got to get out once in a while. So he got his dad to babysit, and he and his wife went out. And so anyway, Dad, this little guy, 4 years old, 10 o'clock, time to go to bed. So he told him 2 or 3 times, time to go to bed, David. Time to go to bed. David didn't go to bed. So Grandpa finally says, David, upstairs, go to bed, right now. I'm going to tell you again. David looked at his grandpa and he said, Grandpa, you need to chill out. That's what Peter did. That's what Peter did. Peter did not have the mind of God. And Peter was telling God what to do. No wonder Jesus said to him right after that, Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me. Get behind me. And then he uses this word. It's not a very nice word. I'm glad I wasn't Peter. Get behind me, Satan. He says, you are a stumbling block to me. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but you have merely human concerns in your mind. And therein lies the problem. Therein lies the problem of God's plans aren't our plans. God's ways are not our ways. But God is the source. God is the one we can trust in all of this. I wanted to read this to you. It's interesting. From the Message from Peterson. And what it says here in the same verses. Then Jesus went to work on his disciples. Oh, I'll back up here a little bit. Sorry about that. And where he says, then Jesus made it clear to his disciples it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem, submit to an ordeal of suffering at the hands of the religious leaders and be killed, and then on the third day be raised to life. And Peter took him in hand, protesting, impossible, Master. That can never be. But Jesus didn't swerve. He said, Peter, get out of my way. I like that. Peter, get out of my way. Satan, get lost. You have no idea how God is working. Interesting. And then he says this to us, and we talked about this on Friday in our men's group at breakfast, and I think a lot of people look at this passage, especially about when it reminds us we need to pick up our cross and follow Jesus, and that's sometimes hard to interpret. It is for me. It's difficult to, what does that really look like? Does it look like those guys in the Philippines on Resurrection or Good Friday where they nail themselves to crosses? I don't know. But what does that mean to us? What does that mean when Jesus says this? When Jesus then says to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever wants to lose their life for me will find it. And Peterson goes on to say in the same passage, then Jesus went to work on his disciples. Anyone who intends to come with me, you have to let me lead. You are not in the driver's seat. I like that. I like the way Peterson puts it. He's right on. You're not in the disciple. You're not in the driver's seat. I better not say that. I was gonna. No. That was my inner worldly guy. Oh God, forgive me for even thinking about that. Just kidding. My wife really helps me when I drive. In fact, one day, you know what she told me? She does help me, honest. I'm being honest. I'm driving, and I always get this. Alan, your blinkers on. Yeah, I know. Alan, your blinkers on. Yes, I know. You can go now, you don't have to wait, the light's green. I know. Finally, one day I said, Sue, why don't you just, like, you don't have to get in the back seat, but just don't, I know these things, it just takes me a little longer to process them. And so anyway, she said, okay, I won't do it anymore. I don't think that'll ever happen, but... And so anyway, the next day I'm going into town, and I hear this, "You're my hero." And I looked down and my blinker was on, and I go a little further, and I'm at a stoplight, and it turns green. I'm still sitting there, and she says, "You're my hero." You know, it made me feel good. Honestly, guys, you know, or gals, you know, if you want to just tell your hubby that he is your hero. You know, it was wonderful. Thank you for that. Maybe you ought to revisit it. Anyway. Then Jesus went to work on his disciples. He said, anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat. I am. Don't run from suffering. Embrace it. Don't run from suffering. Embrace it. I like that. Well, that's what picking up your cross is. It's not running from suffering, not running from the will of God. Never forget my son Adam in Canada when we first went there. We had a wood stove, and we used to send him out right after supper, and it would be dark in the wintertime in Canada after supper, and we sent him out with the toboggan, and he had to go down to the woodshed, load it up with wood, and bring it up. And one day he said, "Dad, I'm not going to go after that wood anymore." I said, "Really?" He said, "Get after the wood right now. I want to see it back up here." So anyway, he was a little red-headed guy, and he just grit his teeth, and he just bugger off and come back with a load of wood. And I said, "Thank you, Adam." He looks at me and said, "Dad, one day I hope you have to pack wood." Don't run from suffering. The one thing we have to remember about Christ is that Christ died for us. He suffered and died for us. I'll never understand that. Never. How someone could love me so much to be able to die for me and shed his blood so I could be forgiven. Peterson goes on to say, self-sacrifice is the way. It's my way to finding yourself, your true self. What kind of deal is it to get everything you want and lose yourself? And like the scripture says, or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit the gift of God? Forfeit your soul. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for the cross. Lord, as we take communion today, the reason we take communion is because of the cross. It's because you suffered and died on the cross for our behalf. You died on the cross for our sins so that we could be forgiven. I'll never understand that love, but I thank you for it. And that's why we celebrate it. You reminded us to celebrate it. You reminded us that we were to come together and we were to take these elements, we were to pick up this bread and break it, and this broken bread would remind us that, Lord, your body was broken for us, that you suffered for us. They didn't have to spit on him. It bugs me. Always has. He suffered for us. And then the same evening he picked up the cup and he held it up and he gave thanks for it. He shared it with them and he says, this will be a reminder that I have shed my blood for your life, for your sins. That's why we take communion. And this communion table, like I've shared with you before, it's not our table. It doesn't belong to mankind, humankind, kind, any kind of church kind. It's the Lord's table. And He reminded us to take these elements. And when we take these elements, to be thankful and that we would give thanks for what He's done for us. And that's why we take communion. If you're not comfortable when taking communion, anyone's welcome. If you're not comfortable, well, feel free just to watch. But if you've understood why Christ died for you, I encourage you to take part in the Lord's communion table, because it's a reminder of what He has done for us. So I'm going to ask Linda and Wynn and Sue if you would help me, please.
Our closing song is Down at the Cross, otherwise known as Glory to His Name. Please rise and sing together verses 1, 2, and 3. I always do a blessing, after the service. But I need to tell all of you what a blessing all of you are to my wife and I. This church is unbelievable, and how you treat us, and how you love us, and how we just feel so much a part of God's family here. So thank you. And to you guys, this is what the Lord said to Al. He didn't really say this, I put that in. But He did say this is how you're to bless them. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make His face shine upon you, all of you. And be gracious to you. May the Lord turn His face towards you
and grant you, give you, bless you, pour upon you his good and his everlasting peace. All of you, bless you. Have a good week.